I'm the oldest of 5 children, born to an immigrant Puerto Rican father and a French-Irish mother who are both deaf. And of all the life lessons that they have taught me over the years, I always like to begin my talks by repeating in sign language the one lesson that my parents taught me every day of their lives. The place of my biggest challenge is always the source of my greatest strength. My father, who was born deaf in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, left school in the 6th grade after his parents divorced. And my grandfather owned a very large, successful paint and body shop in Aguadilla. And he instinctively understood that when someone loses one of their senses, all their other senses takes over and compensates for the loss. And he also realized at a very early age that my father was really good at working with his hands and patiently taught him a life skill in the automobile paint and body business. At the age of 19, my father left Puerto Rico for Aguadilla and moved to a village that was slightly bigger than Aguadilla, New York City, to find his mother. He eventually found her. And by utilizing the skills that he learned as a boy, he quickly got a job at a local paint and body shop in the city. And during the day, my father worked harder than everybody else did in that shop. I mean, be covered with automobile paint and grease. And when 5 o'clock hit, he'd take a shower, get cleaned up, throw on a suit and tie, wear one of those fedora hats, it's real popular in the 1950s, and he'd go out and he'd paint the town. My mother, on the other hand, was a shy girl, and she was born and raised in the heart of New York City. And like my father, she was also born deaf. A few years ago, I remember asking, it was a difficult life, but my mother never really saw it that way. And when I was a kid, I asked my mother, I said, why is our neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen? And she told me that it was shorthand for Helmus Restaurant on the corner. She explained that rather than everybody going to Helmus Restaurant, they would just simply say, let's go to Hell's Kitchen. Now, between you and I, there were no Helmus Restaurant in the 1800s when a reporter for the New York Times first referred to that section of the city as Hell's Kitchen. But my mother never saw the negative side of things. And even though I told her the real origin of the name, if you were to ask her today, how did Hell's Kitchen come about? She'd still tell you that it's a place where a lot of New Yorkers used to eat breakfast at Helmus Restaurant on the corner. She still looks at the positive side of life. And as fate would have it, my soon-to-be parents met at a citywide bowling tournament that was held for over 250 area deaf mutes. They met, they dated about a year later they got married, and a year after that they had me, Jose Anselmo Feliciano Jr. Now, life wasn't easy. 2 deaf people living on 47th Street between 9th and 10th Avenue in Manhattan, New York City with a brand new baby boy. Talk about overcoming life obstacles. And I asked my mother, I said, Mom, how did you know when I cried at night? And she explained that because babies kick their feet, that all she had to do is lay me down sideways next to her in bed, and the kicking from the crying would wake her up. Now, I don't think anybody's ever taught my mother that little trick, but we all learn to adapt in our own way. And my mother's parents, Tim and Edith, lived in the apartments below us. And my grandfather was the superintendent of the building that we lived in, and they were the ones who taught me how to speak. And I was the one, by the time I was 5 years old, who became my parents' most reliable interpreter, which in turn bonded us together way more than the usual parent-child relationship. When I turned 12 years old, my parents and I attended a parent-teacher conference at my school at PS 51. And this was the first time I ever recall being embarrassed of my parents. It was a kid thing. And our 6th grade teacher, Miss Horn, is standing in front of the classroom, and she's going over the school year. And my best friend Bobby's over there with his mom and dad. And right in front of me was the object of my first schoolboy crush, Becky Johnson. Now, even though that my job that night was to interpret for my parents, I must have been distracted and stopped paying attention for a few seconds. Suddenly, Dad taps me on the shoulder and he goes, "What's your teacher saying?" And being a typical 12-year-old trying to be cool, I said, "Dad, I'll tell you later." Which I guess frustrated him even more than just not being able to hear. So to get my attention again and to make sure that I understood that he was a little bit more than annoyed with me, he clapped his hands one time loudly and he said, "What is your teacher saying?" And before I could answer him, I realized that the whole room had turned around and was looking in our direction. Then to make matters worse, the teacher stops talking and she says, "Jose, is there a problem?" And I explained, "Well, my parents are deaf and my father's asking me what you're talking about." Talk about embarrassing. Then she waited until while everybody in the classroom is looking our direction, signed to my parents the parts that they had missed. And my face must have been as red as it could be because all I could remember was praying over and over again for this whole conference to end quickly. And when I got home that night, my father was still upset at me. And he said two words to me that I didn't really understand at the time. Two words that he would repeat more than a few times over the next few years. He said, Jose, just be. Just be. I didn't have a clue what that meant, just be. I was just glad to survive the ordeal. And I said, okay, Dad, and I went off to bed. When I turned 14, my family packed up everything that would fit into a couple of old suitcases. And we sold everything else that we couldn't carry. And my parents and my two brothers and sister went down to the Port Authority on 42nd Street. And we bought 6 bus tickets. And we boarded a Trailways bus for Jacksonville. We moved from Hell's Kitchen, New York, to Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville. Can you imagine how excited I was? I mean, goodbye to New York's cold, snowy winters and hello to Jacksonville's beautiful, warm, sandy beaches. I was going to be living in a year-round paradise. Endless summers, bikini, suntan lotion. I was the luckiest 14-year-old boy in the history of the world. Jacksonville was sunny. It was hot. But there were no beaches to be found. You see, I guess I got caught up in the excitement of hearing that we're going to be moving to Jacksonville that I didn't realize, in addition to Jacksonville, Florida, there was another Jacksonville in Texas. Jacksonville, Texas. Jacksonville, Texas. It turns out that we were moving about 111 miles southeast of Dallas on US 175. We were moving from 7 million people to a little low East Texas town of a population of 7,000 people. From a city that had thousands of taxi cabs to one cab driver, and the guy wasn't even busy. From the city that was so nice, they named it twice, to the tomato capital of the world. The tomato capital, the Big Apple to the small tomato. From the home of the Madison Square Garden to my new home being right across the street from the Tomato Bowl, a local football field. I can go on and on, but you get the idea. And after 2 years in Texas, if you know anything about Texas, football is king. And I had a dream. I wanted to go to the University of Texas. And pretty girls, a good education, 80,000 fans at a football game. Then reality set in. At the age of 18, I had to make a choice. Either become the legal guardian of my little brother and little sister, or have them go to foster care. Then I thought about my parents. Both deaf. My father with a 6th grade education in Spanish. They had to overcome obstacles on a daily basis that we all take for granted. I mean, how do you get from point A to point B in a city like New York without being able to talk, hear, read, or write? How do you get a job if you can't talk in an interview? And if you get the job, how do you keep the job if you can't even hear what the job is or what your fellow coworkers are saying to you? Hell, how do you even get an apartment? And I realized that if my parents can overcome obstacles like that every day of their lives, then becoming a legal guardian of my little brother and little sister would be a snap. And a day after my high school graduation, I got a job working for a road construction company. And I was standing in the hot sun making $4 an hour. And standing in the hot sun, all I was thinking about was to save enough money to buy some sort of transportation. And I started to think about my future. And over the summer, I saved $1,000. And I bought one of those 1967 Chevy Impalas. You know the car they liked at Goodfellas where the trunk was so big that you can give a couple of your dead friends a ride to the dump? Well, I left the road crew at the end of the summer. I'm working at Montgomery Ward's, entered for class at the local community college. So my $600 Chevy Impala, legal guardian of my little brother and little sister, working 30 hours a week at Montgomery Ward's, selling appliances I couldn't afford, taking 18 hours of classes at the local community college, paying my way through school, living in a painfully small one-bedroom apartment, interpreting for my parents, and for good measure, I decided to join a fraternity. And before I knew what happened, a year later, a couple of my fraternity brothers nominated me to be the president of the local chapter. And my opponent was a guy named Troy Phillips. He was a pledge brother of mine. He came from a wealthy neighborhood in Dallas called Highland Park. had a 4-car garage, had a gardener, had a beautiful Datsun 280ZX. In town, he had a 2-bedroom apartment, didn't have to work, always had a wad of cash in his pocket, and his tuition was paid for in full. And looking at him and looking at me, I said, there's no way I could win. And when they announced the next president of the Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity was Jose Feliciano, everything went quiet. Inside, I was so happy. And then it hit me what my father had been telling me all those years. Stop worrying about what everybody else thinks, just be. Stop worrying about what everybody else thinks, just be. Just be Jose. Don't try to be someone else. At that moment is when I understood the words of Mark Twain, when he said, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I turned 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. It turns out that the same parents that I was, at the age of 12, that I was embarrassed about because they were different, because they were deaf, turns out to be the same people that taught me the most powerful lessons in my life. I mean, I had always had love, family, relationships. They taught me by example to be kind, considerate, and caring. They taught me to be a leader. And they taught me to stop worrying about what everybody else thinks, just be. So many of us spend so much time worrying about what other people think of them that it stops us from being who we really are, doing the things we really want to do, which can prevent us from making bold choices and taking risk. And as I look back through college, the one thing I never really counted on was the overwhelming thoughts of self-doubt. And I could always see my father always saying, stop worrying about what everybody else thinks, just be. And when self-doubt started to creep its little head, I could just see my father always saying, so I took everywhere I went, throughout life's challenges. Be evolved into be, do, have. Be the person you want to be. Do the things you need to do. You're going to have the things you want to have. But be was always on the top of my list. It kept me centered, kept my priorities straight. Because if you can't be with it, you can't even begin to undertake the journey. When you can see things done, you can relax. With your objectives clear, you're not swayed by the hiccups or looks like detours along the process because you can stay the course because you know where you're going. And with the destination in mind, life becomes an adventure filled with lessons of family and children and gifts and challenges, which often turns out to be gifts anyway. But if you would have said Jose Feliciano from New York City to Jacksonville, Texas, with a beat-up Chevy Impala, with deaf parents, living on food stamps, would have thought about success, logically I'd have told you, no way, Jose. But just be, that evolved into be, do, have, allowed me to focus on the dream and leave those doubts behind me. I want to share a secret with you. I learned a long time ago that doubt is the enemy, not fear. Doubt's the father of all negative emotions and the thief who steals our dreams and makes us all play it safe. And we think that if our visions are clear, our destination is clear, that people might find us cocky or self-centered. But doubt brings out the worst in all of us, kills the magnificent. Doubt actually says it's impossible, it can't be done. It's like these two little guys on your shoulders. It's impossible, can't be done. It's impossible, can't be done. And I've learned more recently how to respect my ally doubt because I began to discover a strange truth about him. Doubt holds a secret in our hands. Doubt actually is the guardian of the gates to all miracles. Doubt asks to be overcome, and in the overcoming paves new ways for new rules, new limits, new records. He's the wise guardian who challenges the very best, who's willing to step forward for each one of us, who's prepared to look him in the face and say, doubt, I respect you, I know your value, and I am going to get past you. And I've learned how to take him on as an advisor because doubt will tell you where your potential pitfalls are and who's not along with your vision, which in turn will tell you where you need to spend a little bit more energy or have a little bit more clarity. And as a young man, as a guardian of my siblings at the age of 18, I had to learn how to get past doubt fast and move beyond believing into knowing that we'd all succeed. If I would have even stopped and even thought about the challenges, I would have been overwhelmed. And as we built Feliciano Financial Group and world-class advisors, Do came along to play alongside B, because we had to do our homework, work in and on our business every day, always doing with the end in mind. And if you think just be is easy, let me share something with you. To just be, we have to begin to believe in ourselves. And when you begin to understand your true potential and look at what you're doing every day and actually fulfilling it, being takes on a whole new meaning. It's a lesson in humility, or it's a kick in the pants as far as being the best version of yourself goes. There's a great deal to be said about experience. And we bring uncompromising knowledge to our clients. But it's our ability to provide a consistent strength of leadership that will always result in delivering a standout performance for our clients. When we are dedicated to the needs of our clients, they will respond exponentially. But we all need to continually recommit to our success, recommit to our business and our clients and our industry. I mean, our immediate goal should be to build a team prepared to thoroughly navigate the changes that our profession will soon experience. We need to prepare for the future by honestly analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of our current existing business plan and be willing to reinforce assets while creating an action plan to immediately address our limitations. The renewal of our commitment is necessary for growth. It stretches us to reach. It requires us to evolve and mandates that we think outside the box and discover new strategies for the future. For those of us that are willing to commit, great opportunities await. Because the best way to predict our future is to create it. Napoleon Hill wrote that the most powerful instrument that we have in our hand is the power of our mind. And it's those words, as much as any, has helped change my life, which has come full circle right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Some of the same great life lessons that I wrote about in Passion for Possibility and learned by watching my parents overcoming their obstacles has convinced me that success is as simple as turning our obstacles into opportunities. I want to leave you with the words that my father gave me so many years ago. The place of my biggest challenge is always the source of my greatest strength. Just be. And everybody, from my parents, in which they are here, I want everybody together. Just be. Thank you.